Hello my hero, have a nice viewing dear. If you like the story, please like it and write your opinion in the comments, please please please.
My father was the kind of man people admired. A powerful politician, respected in public, always delivering speeches about family values and integrity. To the world, he was a devoted husband, a loving father, a man of principle. But I knew better. I just never had proof. Until now. It started with a late-night phone call. My mother was asleep, and I happened to be passing by my father's study when I heard him talking in hushed tones. Something in his voice made me stop. I wasn't a stranger to his political deals, but this was different. It wasn't business, it was personal. "I miss you, baby," he murmured. "Next weekend, same hotel?" My stomach turned. I stepped back into the shadows, my heart pounding. I didn't want to believe it, but the way he spoke, the softness in his tone, it wasn't meant for my mother. I had to be sure. The next morning, while he was out, I checked his personal laptop. He was careful, but not careful enough. Buried in a folder disguised as tax reports were dozens of emails. Romantic, suggestive, full of promises. And then I saw the photos. A girl. Blonde, barely 19, wrapped around my father in hotel rooms, luxury cars, even at events where my mother had been just a few feet away. I clenched my fists, disgust burning through me. He wasn't just a liar. He was a hypocrite, a fraud who preached morality while betraying the very foundation of our family. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't just going to confront him. I was going to expose him to the world. I sat in my room for hours, staring at the evidence on my laptop. My father, the so-called family man, had been living a double life right under our noses. And now, I had everything I needed to take him down. The question was, how? Confronting him in private wouldn't be enough. He was a politician, a master manipulator. He would twist my words, make excuses, find a way to talk his way out of it. No, I needed something bigger. Something he couldn't escape. Then, the perfect opportunity fell into my lap. My father's re-election campaign was in full swing, and in just a few days, he was scheduled to hold a major press conference. Every news station would be there. Cameras. Reporters. Supporters. It was the perfect stage for his downfall. I started planning. I made copies of the emails, saved the photos, and even recorded a backup of his call logs in case he tried to erase anything. Then, I reached out to a few journalists, ones who had a reputation for exposing corruption. I gave them just enough to spark their interest but held on to the biggest bombshell for myself. By the time the night before the press conference rolled around, my heart was pounding with anticipation. I kept replaying the moment in my head, his face when the truth came out, the way the crowd would react, the way his career would crumble in real time. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared. I was ready. Tomorrow, my father would finally pay for his lies. The day of the press conference arrived, and I had never felt so calm. I wasn't second-guessing myself. I wasn't hesitating. My father had spent years lying to us, betraying my mother, and pretending to be a man of integrity. Today, I was going to rip that mask off in front of the world. I arrived early, blending in with the crowd of reporters and supporters gathering outside the venue. The energy was electric, cameras flashing, microphones being prepped, people murmuring about what my father would say. Little did they know, I was about to rewrite the entire script. Then, he walked onto the stage, wearing his usual confident smirk. He waved to the crowd, shook a few hands, and stepped up to the podium. "Thank you all for being here today. As we move forward in this election, transparency and trust remain the foundation of my campaign." I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped forward and raised my voice. "Then let's talk about trust, Dad." A ripple of confusion spread through the room as heads turned toward me. My father froze for a fraction of a second before quickly regaining his composure. "Son, this isn't the time." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time." I pulled my phone out, holding it up for the cameras. "Since you're such a man of integrity, why don't you explain these emails?" The ones you sent to your 19-year-old mistress? Gasps erupted from the audience. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, cameras zooming in. My father's face drained of color. I turned the screen toward the crowd. Or how about these photos? Hotel bookings? Late-night messages? Should I keep going? That's enough. My father slammed his hands on the podium, but it was too late. The journalists had already started firing off questions, their voices overlapping in chaos. Is this true? Who is she? How long has this been going on? I watched as my father's carefully constructed world began to crack. He opened his mouth, trying to grasp for control, but there was nothing left to save. The truth was out. And his career was about to go up in flames. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted over each other, cameras flashed wildly, and my father stood there, gripping the podium like it was the only thing keeping him from collapsing. I could see the panic in his eyes. He wasn't just caught, he was cornered. This is a personal attack, he stammered, his voice lacking the usual confidence. This is nothing more than a smear campaign, I scoffed. Oh, really? Then why don't you explain these messages? I tapped my phone, and the screen behind him, meant for his campaign's slideshow, lit up with the emails and photos I had prepared. Gasps filled the room as the truth stared everyone in the face. My father's name, his email address, messages filled with flirty exchanges, hotel confirmations. And then, the photos. My father with his mistress, caught in secret meetings, intimate moments, undeniable proof. His face went ghostly pale. Turn that off! He barked at his team, but it was too late. The press conference was being broadcast live. The entire country was watching his perfect image shatter in real time. A journalist shoved a microphone forward. Senator, is this your email? Did you send these messages? He hesitated for a split second too long. That was all it took. Another reporter jumped in. So, the family man you portray is a lie? What does your wife have to say about this? Are you going to resign? The floodgates had burst open. My father looked at me with something between rage and desperation. You've made a mistake, he hissed under his breath. I leaned in. No, Dad. You did. His campaign manager rushed to the podium, frantically whispering in his ear. Security stepped forward, trying to control the chaos, but the damage was done. My father stumbled back, shaking his head, as reality crashed down on him. This wasn't just a scandal. This was his downfall. The press conference was officially out of control. Security tried to push reporters back, but the questions kept flying. My father's face twisted in frustration as microphones were shoved toward him, demanding answers he couldn't give. Senator, are you resigning? How long has this affair been going on? What does your wife say about this? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had built his entire career on control, of the media, of the narrative, of public perception. And now? He had lost everything in a matter of minutes. His campaign manager yanked him from the podium, whispering furiously in his ear. He didn't even look at me as they rushed him off the stage, shoving past reporters in a desperate attempt to escape the firestorm. I stood there, watching him disappear behind a wall of cameras and flashing lights, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Justice. The press was already running with it. Within minutes, headlines started flooding the internet. Family values? Senator caught in explosive scandal. Live press conference goes wrong. Son exposes his own father. Political career in free fall. What's next for the disgraced senator? I stepped outside the venue, my hands still shaking from adrenaline. My phone buzzed, messages, calls, notifications exploding. Some from reporters, some from distant relatives, some from people I hadn't spoken to in years. But one stood out. Mom, come home. We need to talk. I exhaled slowly. The battle was won. But now, I had to face the consequences. I drove home in silence, my mind still reeling from everything that had just happened. My father's career was in flames, his legacy shattered, And now I had to face the one person who mattered most in all of this, my mother. When I stepped inside, she was already waiting in the living room, her face pale, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with something between heartbreak and relief. "You really did it," she whispered. "You exposed him." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "You deserve the truth." She exhaled shakily, setting the mug down. "I knew something was wrong for a long time, but I never wanted to believe it. I never wanted to see him for who he really was." I sat across from her, watching as she rubbed her temples. "Are you okay?" She let out a bitter laugh. "I don't know. I should be devastated, shouldn't I? My husband just humiliated me in front of the entire country. But all I feel is relief. I didn't expect that." "Relief?" She nodded slowly. "I spent years living in his shadow, pretending everything was fine, smiling for the cameras while knowing deep down something was wrong. And now? It's over. He's exposed. And for the first time in a long time, I don't have to pretend anymore." I swallowed hard, feeling a wave of emotion crash over me. "I didn't do this to hurt you." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "I know. You did what I never had the courage to do. You freed us." For the first time since this all started, I felt a weight lift from my chest. My father's empire had crumbled, but in the ruins, something stronger had taken its place. Truth. Freedom. And a chance to finally move forward. The next morning, the fallout had only gotten worse, for my father. Every news outlet was running the story. His face was plastered across headlines, his disgrace analyzed by political experts, and social media was tearing him apart. Senator's family values exposed as a lie, career in jeopardy, scandal rocks political sphere. His own son brought him down, public outrage grows. Will he resign? I scrolled through the articles, seeing his name dragged through the mud. Every statement he had ever made about loyalty, trust, and integrity was now being used against him. Good. He deserved it. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A deep, familiar voice came through. "You ruined me." I leaned back, my grip tightening around the phone. "No, Dad. You ruined yourself. I just made sure the world saw it." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "Do you have any idea what you've done? I built everything from the ground up. And now, because of you, it's all gone." I laughed coldly. "Because of me?" "No, Dad. Because you couldn't keep your dirty little secret buried. You did this to Mom. To me. To yourself." His voice turned sharp. "You think you won? You think you're the hero? You destroyed your own father. Your own family." "No," I said firmly. "You destroyed this family the second you decided to betray it. Now you're just facing the consequences." There was another pause, this one filled with heavy silence. And then, for the first time, his voice wavered. "I don't know what to do." I closed my eyes, feeling nothing but emptiness. "That's not my problem." And then I hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time, knowing that for the first time in his life, my father had no control over the situation. And for the first time in my life, I did. The days that followed were a spectacle. News channels ran segment after segment about my father's scandal. Protesters gathered outside his office, demanding his resignation. His political allies, those who had once sung his praises, were now scrambling to distance themselves. He had become radioactive. And then, the inevitable happened. A breaking news alert flashed across my phone. "Senator resigns amid scandal. Career officially over." I stared at the headline, rereading it twice just to let it sink in. My father had finally stepped down. Not out of guilt, not because he wanted to make things right, but because he had no other choice. I walked downstairs, where my mother was watching the live broadcast. There he was, standing in front of a row of cameras, his once confident posture now slumped with defeat. "I want to apologize to my constituents, my colleagues, And most of all, my family," he said, but his voice was hollow, like a man who knew his words meant nothing now. Mom scoffed, apologizing to the cameras instead of the people he actually hurt. Typical. I sat beside her. "It's over." She nodded but didn't look relieved. "For him, maybe. But for us? We still have to live with the damage." I understood what she meant. The whispers, the stares, the way people would always associate our last name with his disgrace. But I also knew one thing. He may have dragged us through hell, but we weren't going to stay there. We were finally free. The resignation didn't just mark the end of his career, it marked the beginning of his downfall. Without his position, the power he had clung to for years evaporated overnight. His so-called friends abandoned him, his financial backers cut ties, and legal investigations that had once been brushed under the rug were suddenly gaining traction. The media had moved on to the next scandal, but the damage was done. My father had gone from a respected politician to a disgraced nobody in the span of a week. And for the first time in his life, there was no PR team to clean up his mess. I hadn't seen him since the press conference, but that changed when I got a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Please." I knew it was him. And against my better judgment I agreed. We met at a rundown cafe on the edge of town, far from the places he used to frequent, where his face wouldn't draw attention. He looked rough. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, the expensive suit replaced with something plain and wrinkled. For the first time, he didn't look like a politician. He just looked pathetic. "I lost everything, Luke," he said, stirring a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. "I don't even know where to start rebuilding." I let out a bitter laugh. "Rebuilding? After what you did? You don't get to come back from this." He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I made mistakes. But you don't understand what it's like to have people depend on you. To carry that kind of pressure." I slammed my hand on the table, making him flinch. "Don't sit here and act like you're the victim. You weren't carrying a burden, you were living a lie. You had a family who supported you, and you threw us away for what? A cheap affair?" He looked down, silent. He had no defense. Because there wasn't one. I stood up. "You lost everything, Dad? Good. You deserve it." As I walked away, he called after me. "Luke, wait." But I didn't stop. He had made his choices. Now he had to live with them, alone. Weeks passed, and my father faded into obscurity. The once powerful senator, the man who had controlled narratives and dictated policy, was now just another disgraced figure swept into the shadows of public shame. His mansion was sold to cover legal fees, his political allies had long since abandoned him, and his name had become a punchline in late-night talk shows. Meanwhile, my mother and I began rebuilding our lives. She filed for divorce, cutting the last remaining tie to the man who had betrayed us. I could see the weight lifting off her shoulders. The sadness was still there, but so was something else, relief. One evening, as we sat together for dinner, she looked at me and smiled. "You did the right thing, Luke." I nodded. He never deserved our silence. For years I had watched my father manipulate and deceive, thinking he was untouchable. But in the end, the truth had caught up to him. I had made sure of it. The last time I heard anything about him, he had moved to a small town, trying to escape the ruins of his past. But no matter where he went, he could never outrun the truth. As for me, I had no regrets. I had taken down a liar. I had exposed a fraud. And in the process, I had reclaimed my family's dignity. Justice had been served. And I was finally free.